little too sibilant, chances are when that hits vinyl, it's going to sound a lot worse unless you address it. Yeah. So, you know, those are the things that we're usually addressing, making sure the low frequency there's not any weird, excessive, out of phase low frequency that can cause issues with the cut. But
right, you need to have like a mono bass, basically,
to a certain extent. And again, it really depends on a number of things. Depends on, again, how long the sides are, and you know how out of phase the low frequency content is. I mean, for normal rock music, it's not an issue. You get into issues occasionally with a really weird pop production or electronic music where someone has like stereo 808s and they try to delay them because they think it sounds bigger. But, you know, those issues are rare. And when they do happen, it's usually a conversation I have with the producer and try to fix it at the mix stage.
Amazing. So I'm assuming you're pretty much always leaving the box. You have like this crazy analog chain.
Yeah.
Or am I wrong?
Yeah, and it's funny because I wish I could stay in the box. I have a lot of analog gear, and I really go through these phases where I try to be as minimal as possible about my gear because I think the shortest signal chain is always the best option. So I have a set chain. I don't do any of the, you know, you read on forums about people talking about flipping gear around and moving shit around for every song. I don't do any of that bullshit. I have a chain that sounds really good that it took me years to assemble, and that's my chain. And granted, sometimes things will be bypassed, but you know, it's rare that I would ever flip the order of a piece of gear. But yeah, I would say these days, maybe 85% of the time I'm processing through analog gear. For me, some of the determining factors on whether or not I will leave the box for a master is, for instance, if I have a producer that I work with and they like to mix into a limiter and they mix really loud right up against the ceiling, chances are that's not leaving the box because I'm not gaining anything from the analog gear. There's just not enough headroom to do anything beneficial to it. And oftentimes it just sort of loses definition. But, you know, I'm much faster working with my analog gear than I am in the box. And I wish that wasn't the case. And I mean, honestly, as soon as I can get things to sound as good in the box as they do out of the box, then all my gear is going on reverb. But, I mean, it's the truth. That's not happening yet, though. And that's an exaggeration because I do, one of the things I really love to do on the vinyl side is pure all analog AAA mastering. So I will always need analog gear for that. But, you know, some of the in the box tools are getting so good. I mean, you know, the EQs are great. The Fab Filter stuff is amazing. I mean, I can do a whole album with just that stuff if I need to.
Yeah. What would be like, you know, an example of a piece of gear that has not been mimicked well in the box that you think is at least necessary for your chain?
Well, I rely a lot on the Rupert Neve Master Bus Processor. Mm-hmm. So there's no plug-in for that yet. I would love to hear it if there was. And I have a high frequency limiter that I don't really like to talk about too much, but it's sort of a secret weapon that I've been using for a long time on every master I've done. I would say every master that's gone out of the box probably for the last 10 years. Yeah. And that's hard to mimic.
I heard you, I think you were talking to Warren Ewart about this, about you have some sort of philosophy about high frequency compression. How much of that are you willing to share on this podcast?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not that big of a secret guy. I mean, my high frequency limiter is probably the only thing. I mean, you could probably look at pictures of my studio and figure out what it is. It's not something that's you can't buy it off the shelf. But
no one can replace your ears. That's the bottom line.
Sure. So I don't really ever worry about that. I just, but no, I'm a huge fan of high frequency limiting, and I think my philosophy has always been high frequency limiting is often the sound, one of the things that contributes to the sound of old classic records, especially records like actual physical LPs because it's a necessary tool to get audio to translate well to vinyl. I feel it's an analog tool that sort of adds to the, and I'm doing air quotes here, the analog feel of, and some of the character that makes some of those old records sound so amazing. So, I have little tricks that I like to do, and I might actually boost some air or boost maybe some 10 to 14 before the high frequency limiter and let the limiter kind of catch it on louder parts and let it open up on softer parts. I do that sort of thing fairly frequently with my limiters. And I also have a Masilic MPL2 that I use pretty frequently for limiting, mostly for de-essing in mid. But yeah, I'm a big fan of analog high frequency limiting.
Yeah. What I think you're talking about is like, let's say in those Beatles records where they really had to crank the top end to get them to cut through those speakers, which were way, muffled compared to speakers today.
Yeah.
But it's like hyper compressed in like the upper mid range kind of area.
Yeah.
That's what you're referring to.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, again, it varies depending on the makeup of the frequency content of the track. And I'm also oftentimes cutting high end frequently on audio, but it's just another, it's a tool that sits at the end of my chain and, and allows me to do some interesting things that I might not be able to do without it. I can't find anything in the box that really gets close to doing what this does. I can get sort of close with one particular plugin, but there's just some charm to it, and I'm sure a lot of it has to do with just the circuitry inside the box, just the sound of the box,
Yeah, I feel like you're maybe connected enough to get in with some sort of plugin company to mimic one of these things. I'm not sure if that's something that you would be interested in doing.
Well, yeah, I have talked to people about that, but one of the things that I can probably talk a little bit about is I'm currently working with a company out of Colorado called Access Analog. So they're really interesting. What they do is they take real analog gear, they motorize all of the faders and all the buttons, and they put it in the cloud, and they offer a subscription service so you can do real-time tweaking and processing through their gear and capture it back in your DAW.
That's amazing. I have heard of this. That's super cool.
So, it's not totally public knowledge yet, but we're testing, like basically mimicking my mastering chain for Access Analog. So people will be able to log in and process their audio, whether it be mixes or if they're actually trying to master through a chain that's very similar to my current analog chain.
Wow, super cool. So I guess, when that's public,
let me know. That limiter will be part of it too.
Yeah. The high frequency limiter.
Yeah.
Amazing. I want you to talk a little bit, if you don't mind, talking a little bit about Infrasonic. You have so many talented engineers that work with you. How did you bring so many people into the fold? And do you have like a philosophy of like, this is what we're trying to do, these are the kinds of people we're trying to hire?
Oh yeah. So I've always sort of run this business. I never considered myself a businessman. I just considered myself like, a knucklehead punk rocker that just didn't want to deal, like hated what everyone else was doing and wanted to do something cool. So when my partner Jeff and I originally started our recording studio, and the mastering suites, we loved high-end studios, but we always thought, man, we really need to bridge the gap between insane high-end studio and something that, gives you the same quality, but allows artists to relax and not have to stare at the clock the whole time. And, we also always kind of hated the feel of like recording studios and mastering studios that felt like chiropractor's office or like a Starbucks meets a doctor's office where you walk in, you're like kind of afraid to touch anything and everything seems too expensive. And you're looking at the clock because you're like, shit, this just cost me $150 in the last 15 minutes. We wanted to be able to compete with those type of studios, but also retain like our sort of indie mindedness. and the sort of like punk rock DIY thing that we grew up on. That was really important to me. So, throughout the whole time as we were building this business, and I actually bought Jeff out of his portion of the partnership a couple of years ago when I moved here on very good terms. We still talk frequently, but it was time for me to just kind of move on. But I still have the same philosophy. I want to work with people that I like and respect and that are my friends. I mean, who doesn't want to come to work every day and work with their best friends?
Yeah.
And they have to have the same sort of goals in mind and the same sort of ethics. So, I sort of run Infrasonic like a collective, where all of the engineers here they get paid a good percentage of what they do. They take the majority of what they do. Everything else kind of goes back into the business and, helps sustain it. And we try to promote everyone evenly. And, first and foremost, I want this business to be a place that everyone loves to work for. So that's kind of the foundation. I mean, a lot of us here kind of come from a sort of indie punk rock background. So I feel like we kind of have these sort of DIY, for lack of a better term, ethic and way of approaching things. And that's sort of our philosophy. I want to provide the best service, and I also want Infrasonic to be the coolest people to deal with. There are a lot of people that do great work out there, but you hear stories of people going to other studios and other mastering houses, and maybe they do great work, but they get treated like shit, or maybe because they're an indie band, they just sort of get disregarded. And, if you need to talk to the engineer, it's really hard to talk to the engineer and all that garbage. Like, that's not the way we run things. I mean, if I'm doing a single for an indie band, that has to be just as important as doing a record for Chris Stapleton. That's the idea here.
Love it.
And I after I'm done and retired, I want this business to continue. So, it's important that, my guys here have some skin in the game, so to speak. And that's how you keep people happy. And that's what builds a strong team. So that's sort of how we do it.
Yeah. Well, you've certainly, the work speaks for itself. And, there definitely seems to be some sort of, I guess, like a genre almost kind of focus that you guys have like really like we're like the top mastering house for kind of like indie and kind of like, rock and rough around the edges kind of stuff is what I'm noticing just from the discography, which is really, really cool.
Well, it's funny because that's how I got my start, doing weird indie rock and punk rock and noise records and beach goth records. And, the Americana country thing just sort of happened, which is funny because it's kind of truly what I love working on all records, and I love rock and roll, but I really love Americana and I really love country music. And I grew up as a very young child listening to country. And then as I sort of got into rock and punk rock, and you're a kid and you don't know any better, and you're like, oh, this is all bullshit. I hate all this now because I'm into this, And then you get older and sort of rediscover your roots. So it's been really great to, get to do a lot of really great country music.
I was listening to some of those records, like the Brandy Carlisle record is beautiful. Some amazing stuff.
Thanks. Yeah. It's funny because I really don't think of the Americana genre. It's such a weird label because I know people lump like Brandy and Chris Stapleton almost into a country category. And like, Chris Stapleton gets kind of country, but he's like a soul singer. Those records to me are rock and roll records. And same with Jason Isbell. I mean, like if you go see the 400 Unit play in concert, it's like the craziest rock show, screaming guitar solos. It's fucking amazing. And the Americana genre is actually really exciting to me because it sort of reminds me of what I thought punk rock was like 30 years ago before it became like cool thing in malls, It's like Americana is this thing where you're like, we're kind of rough around the edges and a little bit country, but we still want to play guitar solos and do cool shit.
It's happening, and there's real instruments.
And it's real instruments.
That's fun. So let's go back a little bit into your process, if you don't mind. somebody sends you a song or a record, what's the first thing you do? Like, where does it begin?
Listening. So before it even hits me, my